Good morning. Hello. When I started preparing this speech, I was actually forced to think about the concept of future. It was actually something I'd never really thought about before. And during my preparation, I actually came to realize that it's one of these few things that we, as human beings, actually share. Yeah, our future is something that we share, and it's the same for all of us. So that's why I think it's very good and a very wise choice to have the future as the main theme of this event today. So congratulations on whoever chose that, and some people might even say, you know, he or she might have a bright future ahead of him or her. The interesting thing is, I wouldn't say that, and that's not because I don't wish that for that person, but mainly because the thing is, we can't predict the future, which is, I also think, the beauty. That's what makes life interesting and exciting, and yeah, it will always be a challenge, but it's also a bit of a nuisance, especially for us, because I work at a teacher training college here in Amsterdam, and what I'll be doing today is try to explain to you why it's such a nuisance that we can't predict the future for us. But at the same time, I'll try and say, so what we actually can do as teacher trainers. Despite that we do not know what the future will look like, there is still something very important that we can do to make sure that the future remains bright for everyone, also for generations to come. I would like to say a bit more about the generation to come, because I think for the next 16 minutes, it's very important to keep the following in the back of your mind. The thing is, what makes our job so challenging, but also very interesting, is that we basically have to deal with three different groups of people. The first group is, when I go back to my work tomorrow, I will basically be teaching a full-time student who hopefully in about 3 or 4 years will be a qualified teacher. The interesting thing is, the teachers that we're educating now will probably be the teachers of your children. Well, having children is probably the last thing on your mind, but yeah, eventually it will probably happen. So let's say in 10 years you'll have your first children. When they turn 16, we're already talking about the year 2039. So in 2039, the teachers that we're educating now will be teaching your children. That's the second phase. The third phase, and the last phase, is that you need to think about what are schools actually for. Well, generally people agree that schools have two very important functions. First of all, they focus on personal development, so they help shape the people of the future, but also they prepare you to a certain degree for your future career. But don't forget that 16-year-old will be a 30-year-old, and that's when you'll have your job and be part of society in 2053. So just to make my point clear, that the teachers we're educating now are basically preparing the adults of the year in the year 2053, in 40 years. And that's difficult. Because in my introduction, I just said we can't predict the future. I don't know what the world will look like in 2053. And that's what makes our job hard. How do we know what to teach the teachers of the future for a world of which we have no idea what it will look like? When I was thinking about this, an interesting anecdote came to mind. Sometime, somewhere, and I tried to find it, but I was unsuccessful, I read a story which goes something like this. At a certain event, two people meet, a teacher and a person who works in the mobile phone industry. Not sure how you call someone like that, but someone who works in the mobile phone industry. This person asks the teacher, tell me, listen, I've never understood this. How come a field which has been around for such a long time, which has every government's interest, a world in which a lot of research has been done, what should education look like? A lot of money has been invested in it. How come it is still such a mess? Because if you open the newspapers, generally you'll read about failing schools and schools are not meeting the needs of society and they have to improve. He says, so how come it's still such a mess? Because he says it's basically a pretty simple recipe. School building, teacher, pupils, book, timetable. That hasn't changed for over decades. And how come it's still such a challenge? He says, because compare it to my business. A pretty young business, pretty novel business. It's lawsuit riddled, very competitive. You know, it's a very heavy business when it comes to designing novel products which basically needs to meet the needs of the market. He says, but we're pretty successful. Almost everybody, the whole wide world, has a phone. And basically, well, it's something that they're involved with almost every second of every day. He says, so how come? Why is this? And of course, the teacher has his answer ready. He says, well, listen, I would like to ask you, or I would like to see how successful you would be if today you had to design the mobile phone for the year 2053. In other words, design a mobile phone now, literally bury it underneath the ground for the next 40 years. In 40 years, dig it back up, and then see if it meets the needs of the people who are living then and there. And I think that's a valid point, because that's a problem that we face. We do not know what the world will look like in 2053. Let's pick up on something that this mobile phone person said, because he says, education basically has been around for a very long time. Yes, it has been longer than the mobile phone has, but don't forget it still is a relatively new idea. General compulsory education is only about 100 years old. Yeah, it was people's answer to how to get kids out of factories and from the land into schools. Now people say schools themselves have become almost like learning factories, where year by year people are basically pushed through in a conveyor belt type of way. But it is still pretty new. However, we're talking about those 40 years. Before we start looking at the future, let's first have a look at about, well, not 40 years ago, slightly longer than that, just to see how education has changed throughout times. I'm going to use a cheat sheet here. What I would like to share with you is a little short extract from Hard Times, a Charles Dickens book. Because in Charles Dickens' book, there's a teacher who basically shares his vision, his view on education with us. And this is what he says. He says, now, that's what I want, facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else and root out everything else. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. This is the principle on which I bring up my own children, and this is the principle on which I bring up these children. Stick to facts, sir. Yeah, so this is an idea of what education looked like quite a while ago. Yeah, education consisted out of presenting facts, and then children had to learn them by heart, memorize them. I don't think I would need to spend a lot of time convincing you of the fact that, luckily enough, we've moved on from that. Education these days is not so much about facts anymore, which is pretty understandable. Because think about it. In the olden days, the truth or knowledge basically belonged to a very small amount of people. The church had a very important role, and of course, universities had a very important role. In other words, an average Joe, if he or she wanted to find something out or wanted to learn something, there weren't many places he or she could go. So then having to remember facts was very important. But these days, mainly through all these recent developments, especially through the internet and especially through what people call the great leveling, the great thing is that everybody basically has access to everything these days. Basically all the knowledge, all the truths that we've come up with as human beings can be found on the internet. And at the same time, people can share their ideas. If you have a great idea about something, nothing stops you from either twittering that or posting it on your blog. So to come back to my point, facts should not basically dictate what we do in schools, because facts are things that we can basically find everywhere and at any given moment in time. So then what should we focus on? Well, if we look at education here in the Netherlands, two things are very important. That we have the idea that what we do in schools needs to be valuable. Basically, students need to understand immediately why they are learning something. In other words, it needs to be of value for them for everyday life or for their future careers. Yeah, very often Dutch students are not very scared to say, why do I need to know this? Why are we learning this? What's the point? Yeah, so we feel this need to kind of justify everything that we do. I'm not sure if the teacher from Hard Times would have a lot of pupils asking these type of questions. Why do we need to know this? And why are we doing this? So we need to be careful, because the thing is that when we educate teachers of the future, we do not really know what the future generation needs to know or what they need to be able to do. So I don't believe this kind of supply and demand principle should dictate what we do at a teacher training course. That should not be the way how teachers of the future are going to be educated. So what will? If it's not the changing world, if it's not facts, if it's not what we need, what is there? Based on what should we design our teacher training courses? Well, I think the answer to that is pretty close to home. I think it's us. People. That's what teacher education should focus on. And I'll try to explain why. Because the interesting thing is here, what we're basically trying to combine very often is, this ever-evolving, fast-paced outside world, which is changing almost daily, and us, people. And we're almost the complete opposite, because we don't change an awful lot. Well, at least not quickly. We learn more about people, and we understand better and better how we function and why we function. And specifically how we learn, very valuable for teachers. But when we try to merge these two things, that's where, in my opinion, things tend to go wrong. I think a very classic example of that are so-called tablet classes. Yeah, every year we see more and more schools basically incorporating these modern technical devices into their classroom. And it may look very good on an open day, and you might be able to impress the future pupils. But I'm still not very sure if that's what improves education, if that is what makes education better. Because what I said, a tablet, the people that I speak to, the things you read about it, in my opinion, the only thing how it helps is it does the marking for the teacher, and that's basically it. Yes, it grants them access to this, big, wet, this big world of internet that will give them all the facts. But the thing is that a tablet is something that basically revolves around instant gratification. Something has to be able to, you need to be able to find it very, 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 very quickly. And that's basically the complete opposite of how we as people function, and especially how we as people learn. So why is it then? If it's not, the fast-paced world being incorporated into the classroom, what should we focus on? Well, there are two people I would like to use to basically provide my answer to that question. There's a German man called Thomas Siehe. He says that what education should focus on is what he calls cognitive strange domains. And there's another person who says something slightly similar, and that's Michael Young, and he says that what we should focus on is what he calls powerful knowledge. And I'll try to explain why. The thing is that there's a danger that education is going to be focused on direct experience. If we give into this idea of we need to be able to justify to pupils why we do something and why they have to learn something, it's always related to the outside world. How can that be used? But I think the problem with that is that then we never learn anything new. Then there's a risk of getting stuck in a kind of a vicious circle. What we need to be able to do is future generations need to be able to think of the unthinkable. And that's something that Michael Young calls this powerful knowledge. Thomas Siehe says that youngsters, when they go to school, need to be familiarized with what he calls cognitive strange domains. Because the danger is if we don't do that, then it's very possible that education will only evolve around direct experience, things that we like, things that we enjoy, and that's not what the future generations need. Because schools should not be places based on experience, schools should be based on concepts. And I think that's a very important point. Because if you look up the definition of the word concept, I need to have a quick peek again. One dictionary says that a concept is an idea of something formed by mentally combining all its characteristics and particulars. So what schools should focus on is teaching people to look at the characteristics and particulars of things. Don't take things at face value. Try to understand what it actually is. How does it work? What's its value? But I think the mentally manipulating, that's the important part, because that is difficult. It's difficult to take a concept and see what you can do with it, see how it can help you solve certain problems. And that's very, very, very hard. A couple of days ago, or weeks ago even, in company of a small group of people, I said something which a lot of people had to laugh about. Because I said, learning hurts. I was actually contemplating having t-shirts printed with that slogan on it, learning hurts. Because I think it's one of these universal truths. In essence, learning always hurts. Because you're always confronted by the fact that I thought I knew something, or I thought I understood something, but when you learn something new, you have to adjust that. That's hard work. So what should the teachers of the future be able to do? Well, they should become what Thomas Zia calls, they should become tourist guides into strange worlds, or cognitive strange worlds. The tourist guide is the important bit here, because learning hurts. So what should teachers of the future be able to do? Well, I would like to say they need to be able to soften the blow. They need to make it slightly easier. This working with concepts, mentally performing certain actions with that, that's something that they need to teach the future generations. Because if we move back to iPad classes, I don't believe that these things go very well together. This principle of learning hurts, or softening the blow, actually made me think of a poem which I actually did during my teacher training course. And it's a poem by Emily Dickinson. It was written in 1868. The poem goes like this. It says, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too fright for our infirm delight. The truth superb surprise, as lightning to the children eased with explanation kind. The truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind." And I think that those last two lines, that they're very important, because I think the last thing our future needs is blind people. We need people with visions on how to solve the problems that they will be faced with in about 40 years. Because I do believe that how the world is changing, future generations will be confronted with more and more problems and more challenges when it comes to important things in life, like the environment. So that's why I think it's very important that the teachers being educated today will hopefully educate the generations of the future, so they're able to think of the unthinkable and deal with the world in concepts and not just in easy gratification way. Thank you very much.